Yes, people, I'm doing another episode about Tourette's. The difference between this one and the one I did earlier is one earlier I did was with my niece. This is with someone that's been living with it for many years. She tells her stories, an embarrassing story, especially with her acting like a squirrel, which is actually quite funny. And also overall life. Tourette's is something that it cannot be cured. It is something that is uncontrollable to the person that is actually living with it. This episode brings a little different light into it. So stay tuned, sit tight, and enjoy. Welcome to another episode of Real Talk Not Filtre.
Thing that's really affected my story the most is when I was 17, I started making noises. I thought they were hiccups until they started to change. I was 24 when I was diagnosed with Tourette's syndrome. And the timing was actually kind of cool because I'd actually been kicked out of my previous college major and had started a new major and ran out of time to do an internship. So I ended up doing a research paper on Tourette's syndrome, and it's changed my life. It's done so much for my confidence and ability in myself, for understanding awkward situations. Awkward is kind of my favorite. It's kind of weird, but I love it. And seeing how my life has just changed, and that was just a huge defining point in my life. I mean, there's lots of those, but I feel like any life is going to have those. Like, life is just defined by these moments where you could go so many different directions.
Very true. As you're absolutely right on that one. You mentioned growing up with Tourette's. How was it with people around you, friends, family? Any embarrassing stories or things where you're like, hey, I wish that never happened at that point in time?
I have so many stories. That's actually part of what got me started. Before I did the research paper on Tourette's syndrome, I knew I was making these noises. There was a lot of funny stories. So I actually started a blog just so that I could remember them, have them all written down. Just because there were so many funny stories. I think my favorite is a few years ago, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, I was at a talent show for my church, huge event. And I was sitting on like the third or fourth row, and the MCs come out, they're kind of killing time in between setting up different acts. And one of them says to the other, "So Nate, I hear you do this really great Kronk impersonation from Emperor's New Groove." And he's like, "Well, yeah, I'm kind of good at it." She's like, "Great, let's hear it." And he's like, "Well, I need someone to do the squirrel noises." And all of a sudden, my Tourette's pops out making those squirrel noises. And he's like, "Great, we've got a volunteer." He jumps down off the stage, shoves the microphone in my face. And I am just dying of laughter, just trying to, no, you don't want to do this. You don't want to do this. And a lot of members in my church knew the same thing. And they told me afterwards, they were thinking the same thing. "No, Nate, don't. Nate, don't." So by the time I catch my breath and say, "I have Tourette's syndrome, I can't duplicate those noises, I can't do it again," you watch him just kind of deadpan and go, "Oh," and turn around to head back to the stage. And he turns back around. Can I tell people really quick what just happened?" And I'm like, "By all means, please." He was awesome. Such a good sport about it, but I was just like crying from laughing so much because he was such a good sport, but the timing was perfect.
That is awesome story. Saying all that, do you currently, has that been, I guess, outgrown, or do you still suffer with it?
I'm going to have to say neither. I have not outgrown it, but I also do not suffer it. It's kind of my favorite thing.
Oh, awesome.
Like that story is not unique. There are so many times where the timing was just so perfect, and so the comedic timing was just on point. I ended up naming my Tourette's syndrome. And so they've kind of got their own name, their own personality. So I definitely don't suffer from it.
Oh, that's good. That's actually excellent. The reason why I use that word suffer is because, one, I have a niece that suffers, I would say, perfectly from the Tourette's. And again, there's different symptoms of Tourette's. One
Hmm.
I've noticed again, and you're more of a what's it called, more knowledgeable in that sense on the different factors of Tourette's. So she suffers with involuntary movements.
Hmm.
So that sometimes gets in a way and can lead
Yeah.
to, in my personal opinion, and sometimes hers is dangerous because I've seen her like just sitting there
Yeah.
and just bang her head off the wall and just like, "Hey, you're okay?" She's like, "Yeah, it happens." I'm just like,
Yep.
"No, that's not good."
Yeah. And I definitely got lucky in the fact that I'm more vocal than I am physical. Noises are fine. They're awkward, which is again kind of one of those defining points. I wrote a college research paper on how Tourette syndrome affects communication, especially the noises and the vocal aspect. And I got a lot of support from my professors, and they were, this is great. There's really nothing like this in the communication field. You really need to get this published. So I ended up expanding it into my first book, which is called Awkwardly Strong.
That is awesome. That is very awesome.
Thank you.
How many books do you have out? Or is that your only book that you have out so far?
I actually have 3 out, and my 4th one comes out in September,
Oh,
end
that's
of
excellent.
September.
That is excellent. Are you able to tell me any of the book titles besides that first one?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one is Awkwardly Strong, as I mentioned. The second one is Tragically Strong. The third one is Fearfully Strong. I kind of took all of these things that hold us back and showed how they can be tools to be utilized rather than something to hide or be ashamed of, or, let us hold it back, let us be held back. My 4th one that's coming out is called Hard-Earned Lessons Learned, a guide on what I wish I'd known when self-publishing. It's basically all the mistakes that I made and how not to make those mistakes.
Which is honestly, that's a fantastic book. I actually would
Yep.
love to. I'm actually planning on creating a book or writing a book soon. So hopefully your book comes out before I actually start and go into it. So I can just read it like, okay, do not make these mistakes and I should be okay.
Right? Yeah, there's a lot of things. I want to go back and redo my poor first book so much. It has such great content, but there's just so much that I'm like, man, I just wish I would have known that that was a thing. Man, I feel like I failed my poor little book. Like, don't worry, I'll get you taken care of. I'll get you fixed.
Based off your first book, it looks like it was based off of personal experiences. Is your second and third book the same as well?
Yes, they very much are. I've been dealt a heavy hand in my life, and there's a lot of hard things that I've had to experience. I've been homeless. I've lost 3 out of 4 siblings. I'm very open about the things that have happened just because it's healing for me and it helps me kind of process in a way. And that's the whole premise of the book, like, is being open and sharing these things and how I've been able to then connect with other people, how I've been able to help and serve other people. And then the same thing with fear. I've just always been such a big chicken. I got sick of it. And I'm like, you know what? I've done this with awkwardness. I've done this with hard things in my life. Like, how can I utilize fear? What is it about fear that holds us back? But how can it also be something to help me, since it's there anyways? It's not like sometimes you can get rid of it. I have overcome my fear of snakes. I have overcome my fear of men. I have overcome my fear of public speaking, obviously. But fear is something that does happen. What I found, just real quick, because it's fascinating and exciting and I love it, is those physiological things that you feel when you have fear, your throat tightens, your stomach gets all the butterflies in it. You do the exact same thing. Your body does the exact same thing right before you're excited as well. So a lot of it's just kind of a mindset flip. Like, whenever I saw a snake, it was, ooh, it's okay. I'm physically safe. It was a reminder that I'm physically safe. There's not a valid concern for the fear. And, it's kind of cool to see, I tried to think of all the good things about snakes, which there are some that I still struggle with. I mean, I grew up in the desert with rattlesnakes, which are deadly. You obviously want to stay away from those. So
Yeah.
there's definitely some give and take with it, but there's also a way to be able to flip that as well.
So even you mentioning snakes, I'm getting like cold chills and I'm like, I'm looking around to see if there's any over there. So I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm like freaking out. I got wires going down. I'm just like, is that a snake? Yeah, there's certain fears, to be honest with you, that I don't mind keeping. I'd rather not overcome them just for the sake
Yeah.
of peace of mind.
Yeah, and that's part of it too, is part of it. Fear is there for a reason. Fear is there to protect us. My
Yeah,
fear of snakes is because growing up around rattlesnakes, they are deadly and I want to stay alive.
exactly.
So it is a valid concern, it's a valid fear. And so that's why, like, it's more just kind of a check-in. Okay, this is a safe snake, I'm not gonna die, I'm not in any physical danger. And I can kind of I'm much better around snakes than I used to be. I've got cousins who have snakes for pets. It drives me crazy. But just kind of to push myself out of my comfort zone, I'm like, hey, Kristen, can I come like touch your snake? Like, I just want to touch it. I don't want to hold it, but I want to touch it.
Yeah. To me, every snake is very dangerous. Whether it's like a baby snake, if it's like a snake still in an egg, it's very dangerous to me. I'm just like, no. I'm like the acronym of fear that they give it is forget everything and run. That's exactly what I'm gonna do and just run. Like, it doesn't matter where I am. It was like, oh yeah, it's a friendly. No, just run.
See, and I prefer the other acronym of fear that is face everything and rise.
Yes.
I would much rather rise and become a better person, more open, more accepting, um, and understanding the role that our feeling of safety plays in our general well-being. I've been doing a lot of study and I've been working with some coaches that talk a lot about, wow, I can't even remember his name all of a sudden, but he's got this pyramid of self-actualization, where the very first thing you need is you need to make sure that you're safe, and you can't feel safe. If you can't feel safe, you can't move up to the next levels of the pyramid. You can't have healthy relationships. You can't have self-actualization. You can't, all of these other things that make life so much more worth living. Feeling safe is such a core central aspect of that.
Very true. You're absolutely right on that. And I believe that's one of the necessities of being human is you have to have one safety. And if you're not feeling safe in a situation, then you kind of omit the humanity of the aspect or the environment that you're in. And then now you're always looking over your shoulder. You're always living in fear in quotation. So it's very interesting. And I like that aspect, and your mindset of that is that you look at your situation, everything you've been through, and you look at the positive side of things. I remember hearing that as humans, or just our nature, is that we always look at the negative first, then we look at the positive. So like I mentioned, yeah, the first acronym what I thought about was fear was forget everything and run. And then you got that. I forgot what you mentioned for your acronym with fear was
face everything and rise.
Exactly, which is the totally opposite. It's like, now we're not gonna run, but we're actually gonna fight in a sense, right?
Yeah.
And it's not just fighting, we're observing, because I think that's our biggest thing, is that a lot of us, when we get into bad situations, we run away from it instead of actually taking that time. And the biggest thing I've learned in a fight, in a sense, or even during competition, is that once you take a good breath, like when you're breathing, is the biggest thing is a lot of people don't breathe when they're scared. So when you have that exhale, you get that oxygen going within your body, your brain cells start going, you start analyzing the situation, therefore you put a plan against it. So again, it's that rising aspect that a lot of us, like very little of us, do, but we actually just run away from it instead of facing it.
Yeah. I've got another mentor that I work with. I work with a lot of mentors in like the self-development world, and like trying to become a better person, because that allows me to then become better equipped to help others as well. And that's part of what I want to do. But I work with a man named Dr. Benjamin Hardy, and I love that he says everything happens for you, not to you. So, and I look back on my life, and I've mentioned that I've had some pretty rough stuff happening in my life. I mean, being homeless is not something that I actively sought to become. It was not something that I enjoyed. But looking back on the experience and how much I learned, it's fascinating how much better of a person I became. Even I was only homeless for a week. You know, it's not like I was homeless for an extended period of time, but it only took a week for me to go, oh my gosh, this is not something I want to live with the rest of my life. And it was definitely a good motivator to make sure that I'm in a zone where I don't have to become that again, but also how I can reach out to help others in that situation as well. Because it's really hard. I was homeless, and this is going to sound like, oh, that's not being homeless. That's like a vacation. Like, I was homeless while I was living in Hawaii. Okay. Which, yeah, I didn't have a ton of like cold, extreme cold to live with. I didn't have extreme temperatures. You know, it's fairly mild. You know, when there's rain, you can just kind of go inside. The difficult thing in Hawaii, there are no public restrooms. So that causes some issues, you know, like that's not something that you would think about. You don't think about how expensive it is to eat because you have no place to store and cook food. You have to buy everything from a restaurant. You're putting out, so it makes it hard to be able to try and save any money to get back into a location. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I never would have thought of these things. I never would have realized how difficult this cycle can be to break. And it made me more empathetic and caring and understanding toward others, but it was also a huge motivator for me because I pass. I don't want to do that.
And I think, again, that's another thing that's missing, is that we see a lot of people in situations, but we've never been in that situation. So we like brush it off like, oh, just do this and do that and you're fine. Not really putting yourself in those shoes. And like they always say, walk a mile in my shoe. Therefore, once you do that, you actually understand other people's situation. Again, it's like when we look at those that are less unfortunate, they don't have necessary things such as food, shelter, a place to use the washroom, bathing, those things that make us feel happy and enriched, is those small things that we're missing out in life. We don't need those expensive cars just to make us, and those fancy houses to make us happy or feel happy. It's that, hey, I can go home, turn on the hot water and have a nice like bath and just be clean and such like that. And like you mentioned, it's if we show more empathy and more humanity and compassion to those that are less unfortunate, I think then the world will be a better place. And therefore we look at certain situations and be like, okay, now we understand what those people are going through, and make ways and build charities, build foundations to outsource and help those that are in need.
Yeah. I mean, and even, I'm going to go back a little bit where you mentioned that makes us feel happy, but I kind of want to argue with that a little bit because it makes us feel human. You feel so disconnected and so unworthy of like, oh, they're just going to look down on me. They're going to think that I stink. They're going to judge me, you know, and it just becomes this negative spiral. And there is an aspect of pride of, no, I don't want to just live off of other people, at least in my mind. Like that's how I was raised. I want to be independent. And so it's not necessarily about providing, you know, charity in the answer. It's about providing resources to help them get that leg up, you know. That's complicates things because it does throw in another factor. But at the same time, it's almost more fulfilling to feel more creative, to feel like, okay, this is going to be a much better answer and it's going to benefit and lift everyone at the same time. I've got a friend who has a nonprofit organization. He's from Haiti. When he was living there in 2010, they had that really big earthquake. He was actually buried under a 3-story building. It took them 28 hours to get him out. And he talks a lot. He's actually coming out with a book of his own. I helped him kind of get that set up, get it together, get it out, about rising from our own rubble, and how he doesn't help Haiti by providing things. He doesn't send them jars of peanut butter. He doesn't send them, you know, supplies. He created a mentoring program so that each person can get education, and the people can then help themselves to provide for their own needs.
which you're absolutely right. And I like that because they always say, I think it was teach a man to fish and he will never go hungry again. And that's really
Yeah.
is that concept is that you
Yeah.
don't give someone in the fishing concept is you don't give them fish and be like, yeah, you'll be okay. If you teach them the
Right.
education factor of it, it's a skill set that they'll always learn. And it's something they'll learn that'll give them nutrition and provide for them and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
And I like that you argued with me and you mentioned no, I love it because in all honesty, I'm actually working on something on the behind the scenes, which I won't, anyways, it's going to be about literally getting back to human, of being that factor of being human beings. Is that something that we
Mhm.
forget? And I keep mentioning in previous podcasts, and some of my viewers might be sick of it, but hey, it's real talk, so I don't really care. It's the fact that, hey, we're too busy doing. We're so much of a doers and we're so much getting things done that we forget to focus with others, like within ourselves, and make sure that ourselves and others around us are in perfect health. And we are more
Mhm.
closer to be more in being human, having showing that humanity. And the word charity can also mean love as well. So
Yes,
those are
absolutely.
the things I believe that we're missing in this world, especially this time that we see situations as in Afghanistan. You mentioned Hades, that they went through the earthquake and now they're hitting a tropical storm. It's again, it's like,
Right.
yeah, it's great. It's and yes, I understand in those factors, give them the things that they need to survive, right?
Yes.
When things are
Yes.
up and running, now provide them not with things to survive, but provide them with things of knowledge, understanding, because with that comes wisdom, and with wisdom, anything is possible. And therefore, hopefully,
Mhm.
with wisdom, they could grow to make a bigger and stronger community. Therefore, when the earthquake hits, they have the knowledge to build structures that are earthquake proof, in quotation. And if the flood comes, they know how to overcome and
Prosperous?
yes, thank you very much. My mind is going, and it's funny. Right?
Kind of a
Your
word
mind,
person.
exactly. Your mind goes faster than you talk, which is fantastic.
Mhm.
So those are the things that I love, especially with the podcast and interviewing a lot of people, because you understand that I believe that there's a lot of people that have that compassion and mindset that this is where life needs to go as human beings. And I'm glad to know that there's other people that actually have that mindset as well, and they're willing to aim for it, whether it's in your case writing the book, therefore other people's with i.e. Tourette's or book number 2 and 3. I'm not too sure what they're about, but we'll talk about it another day and time. But those
Depression and
things,
anxiety.
there you go. Those things, they could actually help others, that when they read it, they could be like, okay, I know how to overcome it, or
Mhm.
get a general idea of how to overcome it and how to be a better person, but not fear it, but rise against it and make it a
Right.
positive thing. So,
Yeah. Because the hard thing about when you're in those hard situations is, you kind of get this, at least this is how I did it, but I tend to get paralyzed by fear. Like I just completely freeze up. And I kind of just wait. There's a lot of talking about like waiting for the storm to pass. Um, but at the same time, the fastest way through, I mean, the fastest way for it to end is to go through. Like
mhm.
if you walk in a direction, like you're going to come to the end of the storm sooner rather than waiting for it to take its sweet time and do what it wants. Um, if you, and I mean, granted, there is some time and processing that is going to be required. I mentioned that I've lost 3 out of 4 siblings. My last one, I had a brother in 2019, December of 2019, who was murdered. Like I'm just barely kind of coming out of that because there was a lot to process. There was a lot to deal with. There was a lot to heal from, not only from the event itself, but from having to go to court and to testify, and to show up for that cause of justice type of a thing. So it kind of extended that process a little bit. Um, there is going to be time that you have to take. I feel so weird saying this because I'm probably the only person in the entire world who was grateful for the pandemic, but I needed the world to shut down so that I could shut down and just spend 24/7 focusing on processing and crying and healing and spending time with my family. you know um it was so necessary for me. It was so needed. I've done it other times where I've still had to show up to work, but they were less extreme situations. You know, not all of my siblings have been murdered, thank goodness. But any tragic situation, like you do need that time to heal and process, whether it be in little pockets because you still have to function from day to day, or whether you get really lucky like I did and have the world shut down for you.
And I like that you mentioned it's that function day to day, because despite the storm around you, time does not stop and give you a break and say, hey, I understand, I'm going to sympathize with you, so let's stop right now and every day is going to be a Saturday. It doesn't work that way. It's always moving.
It would be so nice.
It would be very nice, but it's that how to rise and take control of your situation, and like we mentioned, turn it into one, a positive, two, accepting. And that's another factor, because a lot of situations that we're in, we don't accept it. And as soon as we accept the situation we're in, then after that, the next word I'll use is we're willing to overcome it, seen in a different light. And then I'll say, then we could turn it into something either productive. Therefore, we're able to be stronger and understand what the situation we're in. Amazing
how physical emotions become.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not just traumatic things like this. It's more noticeable with something big, but even little inconveniences. Like I watched my dad get so stressed about, my grandparents have recently been diagnosed with the coronavirus. They both tested positive. And he's now stressed because if he is exposed to them, he has to he's not allowed to go to work for 2 weeks and he has to be without pay, which financially he'll be fine. But just watching his stress level rise, I can almost watch his immunity drop.
Yeah.
Because he's stressing so much. You know, all of the emotions take such a physical toll on us.
You're absolutely right on that one. So I remember, off topic, but same topic. This is how I felt like when I'm competing. I run races and marathons, and the fact that I'll line up and I'm like, okay, and I know I could run it and it's fine. And then when you're there again, you get the butterflies in the stomach, my arms and my legs, they cramp up and they feel tight. And I'm sweating and I'm tired already. And I didn't even run. And it's just like, what's going on? And it's not until I hit play on my, cause I run with music with the headphones. It's not until I hit play, then I'm like, okay, listen to the beat, listen to the rhythm. And then you start to process where you are. And it's interesting the emotions that.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. By the way, that was my Tourette's.
I noticed. I didn't want to say anything. I'm just like, I pointed out, I'm like, yes, that's one of them.
Yep. Yeah. But just for everybody else, it just happened. Because I also don't know if you can hear my dog downstairs is just barking his head off. So hopefully I've got it between the earplugs and my sound and everything. You don't hear it, but wasn't sure.
Yeah, I notice it, but again, my niece that suffers from it, I'm just like, yeah. I get used to it.
Yeah, it's amazing what even understanding by exposure can do for things like that. And that's part of why I'm so open about telling all of these terrible things that have happened in my life, because then people don't just go, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I don't know what to do, pat me on the head, and then just, I don't know what to do, so they run away. Yeah, I'm open because then I can explain, yeah, and this happened and this was so great, and they can kind of store that in the back of their memory for, okay, note to self, if I have a friend who loses a family member, don't take them chicken dinners because everybody brings chicken.
Read your book. There you go.
Yeah, read my books. There you go. Thanks for that. Read my books, come to my writing retreats,
There you go. A pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.